What's your true, supernatural, unexplainable, downright creepy story? A few years ago, I still had an old slider phone. One day, I got a random phone call asking from some girl named Sarah. I told them they had the wrong number and they immediately hung up. For the next few months, I would get these calls asking for Sarah about once or twice a week, coming from different numbers and different sounding people. Sometimes, these calls came at 3 in the morning. Well, one day, I got a call and like usual, I said, "I don't know Sarah." And after they hung up, I went to my contacts and hit redial after I did the machine takeover, and it said, "This number does not exist." I went back through my call history trying to call some other people that had called me with the same result. A machine telling me, "That number does not exist." Every time I would get these calls, I would redial the number and still get that machine. I googled the numbers, but all I learned is they were coming from North Dakota, Montana, basically everywhere in the Midwest, which isn't all that weird because I live there. I started wondering what was going on, so the next time I got a call asking for Sarah, I said, "Oh yeah, she's right here." And the other person on the other end said, "No, she isn't," and hung up. Then things started getting weird when I started getting calls from unknown numbers calling me. Whoever or whatever on the other end hung up the second I said hello. The creepiest one I ever got was from a call I got where they did not hang up after I said hello. I could hear someone was on the other end just listening and breathing, but they did not say anything, just something uneasy about it. Eventually, I switched phones and got a smartphone, and I immediately stopped getting the calls. I haven't gotten a single random call in about 3 years now, despite the fact that I still have my old number from the old phone. Midnight Monster here. That was story 1. Today, we have 9 stories coming at you of the most creepy, unexplained, downright weird, true supernatural stories. If you like these type of stories, subscribe to the channel and press the like button, as Midnight Monster will be releasing daily videos. Here comes story 2. My grandma is in a very stereotypical horror movie house. A small Midwest town, a white and old-looking home on a farm. She even has a chipped wooden Mother Mary nativity in the front yard. You get the picture. The worst is she has a cemetery about a half-mile down the road. Anyways, I used to sleep in the room in the corner on the top floor, my aunt's room, and it had a wooden rocking chair in it. When I was younger, I would wake up because I thought I heard it rocking, to the point where I would wake my grandma up and have her stay in the room. Well, about 10 years later, my mom, aunt, and I, during Thanksgiving, were talking about how creepy Grandma's house was. My aunt goes on to talk about how when she was younger, the reason my mom and she ended up sharing a room was because she thought her room was haunted. She said she woke up one morning and the rocking chair was about 2 feet closer to her bed. And after that night, it would start rocking on a nightly basis at midnight. Freaked me the fuck out. I was 12 to 13 and we just moved to the UK from Texas the year before. We moved into the nice farmhouse in the south of England near Wilton. We were completely alone for at least 3 miles in each direction. Anyways, on with the creepiness. The first thing that happened was in our kitchen. It was a large room with light fixtures on the ceiling. Those lights were flickering one night and I was just staring at them. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see a girl. She was wearing a white dress with her hand on the window. Scared the fuck out of me. So I jumped back and tried to put focus on her, but when I tried, she was gone in that instant. The glass of the light fixture fell. The second story is slightly more terrifying. I was home alone. It was raining that night. Mom was out somewhere with friends and I was just watching TV. It was about 9 p.m. and I could hear scratching. Not like a dog scratching the door to go out. Like a long continuous scratch. So I look around the house and I see nothing. I sit back down and watch TV and I hear it again. But it sounds like it's outside, so I dart out the back door and have a look. Maybe a tree in bad weather, but I saw nothing. I came back inside and the TV is off. The front door unlocked. I shit myself. I ran to get a kitchen knife and my mom's old phone. I hid in the office, that is on the ground floor, and text my mom and tell her what's going on. She calls the cops and they arrive. They have a look around and see wet boot prints that walked in through the front door, lead into the kitchen, and then stop. No exit points. Midnight Monster here. If anybody listening has had similar situations of eerie events that they just can't explain, make sure to share your thoughts and stories in the comment section below. About 2 years ago, I had a lot of cats, like 7. Most of them were inside cats, but were 2 males that weren't allowed inside because, they were more territorial and tended to pee on my stuff. I live about a block away from a cemetery. It's small, pretty much just for locals and people who died hundreds of years ago. It's not really active. No one visits really, and the graves are a little dirty and decorated with little fake flowers that must have been placed there years ago. Faded by the sun and weather, of course, they look more like litter than anything, not attached to a grave so much as strewn in the general vicinity. My grandma is resting there. I did not know her well and we weren't close, but she's buried there with my great-grandmother. She died about 2.5 years ago in a nursing home after getting dementia. I never visited and I thought it was awkward and scary. She was withering away and had no idea who I was at the point. Looking at her was like looking at death itself, and I stayed away. I regret it. It's something that made me feel incredibly guilty, and I had many dreams about her afterward. I barely remember anything I did during the day, only that one of the outside cats kept scratching at my back door for what seemed like hours. As it got nighttime, he only got more violent about it, scratching louder and rattling the hinges. So I finally checked up on him at around 11 when I was ready to sleep. He calmed down the second I opened the door. He was weird though, not meowing at all, just staring. He did not run inside like usual when I opened the door. It was like he was waiting. It was nice out, early November, but since it was freaking Florida, not cold or anything, I had nothing to do, so I went outside with the cat, intending to give the little guy some attention. The cat's name was Maxwell. He was a big, muscular black cat with green eyes and reminded me of Toothless the dragon in appearance. He never shut up. It was like he would meow every 3 seconds on loop. So, I affectionately nicknamed him Whiner and Crybaby. He would suck up attention as life depends on it. He was almost like a dog. I even taught him to fetch. When I tried to pet him though, he walked away, waiting for a foot or 2 ahead of me. I went through a few rounds of that before just following him, a little curious and expecting him to lead me to a dead bird or a lizard. Instead, he walked out of the yard, always a step ahead of me. Whenever I would stop, he would wait, looking back at me with his big green eyes expectingly. He was also so noisy, but he hadn't said anything at all for the whole walk. He seemed eerily serious, almost human-like. He took me to the end of the road and started heading towards the graveyard. The closer I got, the more aware I was where we were going. I was trying to pet him and pick him up and go back home, but he was not listening. I felt weird, tense, but excited. It was hard to tell myself I wasn't dreaming, but I knew I wasn't. I half expected it to be a full moon, but it was about a quarter shy of that, a perfectly normal but bright night. The graveyard was the same at night, all blue-toned from the night and the moon overhead, but still messy and silent as always. Maxwell went right inside and perched on a grave. It wasn't anyone I knew. The person had lived and died before I was even born. The cat did not move though, so I sat near it and traced the card words with my fingers. I read off the name written on the grave aloud, straightened up the flowers, and the cat finally seemed satisfied and moved to another grave. And another. I followed the little ritual every time. Max would not move until I did. Upkeep, recognition, moving on. I spent the better part of an hour there, scared I'd be caught by someone, or that I'd lose the black cat in the shadows. But he stayed mostly close, walking his way through the graveyard. Cars passed by every once in a while, so I stayed low and tried to hide behind the trees when they came. I guess someone saw me lurking in the place suspiciously because a police car passed by after some time. I decided that was it for me. There were pretty routine patrols, admittedly. They could have just been passing through, but I couldn't risk being arrested for trespassing. I convinced the cat to come close and grabbed him. He wasn't happy, but I managed to hold on to him and hurry out of the area, him over my shoulder like a little kid. I tried to reason with Max, telling him it was late, it was illegal, and that it wanted to help, but I did not know how. The second I got out of the graveyard, he jumped back down, evading me, but he seemed to understand. He listened when I talked and followed me the 5-ish minute walk home, this time by my heels. Every once in a while he would stop, looking back, so I promised him I would come back tomorrow, and he seemed satisfied. I was shaky, honestly. He did not seem like my cat at all, and I did not understand what had gone on. I thought maybe he wanted to take me to my grandmother, but I didn't know if I got close or what would happen if I didn't have to leave. I went straight to talk to my sister in an attempt to rationalize everything and convince myself it was real. I told her what happened, and she told me that it was November 2nd now. When I was outside with the cat, it was the 1st of November, All Saints' Day, the first day of Dia de los Muertos. We spent a little bit talking, and she helped me calm down and stop thinking, talking about a movie she'd watched. Afterward, I spent the next day going back to the graveyard. I picked up the flowers, righted little benches that fell over, and tried to pay respects to all the graves Max showed me, especially the one for my grandmother. I lit a little candle, left a little statue by her grave that she used to love, and properly said goodbye. Max sent him back to his usual self, meowing constantly, knocking things over, and begging for treats. I let him stay inside for that day and gave him a lot of attention. Well, Max died a year ago in July, and I was out of town for that year's Day of the Dead, so I did not get to know if anything would have happened again. I'm waiting for this year though, and even if nothing happens, I'll still go out and spend the night helping all the lonely spirits who did not get many visits anymore, and the little graveyard near my grandmother's house. A few months ago, a group of friends rented out a block of campsites near an amusement park. I got there Friday afternoon, but a few of my friends have already been there since the night before. Several more friends coming around dinner. They were setting up their tents on the far campsite. I was nursing a headache and lay down on the bench of a picnic table. Just past this was a sloping path through the woods, which led to the bathroom and showers. A huge floodlight was on the side of the building, and it illuminated the path, which was at max 50 yards long. My buddy Tim walked past me asking if I was okay and headed to the bathroom. 15 minutes later, I opened my eyes and saw the silhouette of Tim walking toward me. He's tall, lanky guy who wears a hat and walks with an odd gait. He's easy to recognize, even in silhouette. For some reason, looking at him, I had this weird feeling of dread that at first could not explain. I watched him for a moment or so and realized that although he is moving like he's walking, he doesn't seem to be getting any closer. I sit up at this point and look closer. Everything was wrong with what I was seeing. First of all, the combo of the floodlights from the bathroom and the little light left from the sunset meant that the trees and plants were all casting long shadows, but things were still visible. Tim thought was just a black void, no contour or shadow on him. It was like someone had taken a one-dimensional cutout and filled it with black. Secondly, he was making a walking motion, but it wasn't like he was moving forward or getting closer, just repeating the same walking motion. Third, and the most odd, it was like he was superimposed onto the scenario. The size of the shadow meant he seemed to be close, but his feet to be touching the slopping ground, he would have to be closer to the bathroom and 20 feet tall. It was like a bad 80s green screen where the figure just doesn't quite fit. I watched this with increasing terror and called out to my friend Michael. He was smoking a cigarette and walked over, looked up at the shadow and sort of froze, staring. The black shadow of Tim never got big or closer, but it did start to walk more urgently. Not running, but the steps seemed to be getting faster and more deliberate. The arms swinging more. I kept feeling this inexplicable level of terror and dread, but it was like I couldn't break away from looking. I felt like I was held transfixed. We stood there for several long minutes, long enough for Michael's half-smoked cigarette to turn to ash, when Katie, Michael's girlfriend, came up to talk to him. She asked what we were looking at, and when neither of us answered, she turned and looked at Tim's shadow. It only held for a minute though before she freaked out and started yelling that we needed to go back to the tent now. She broke whatever pull Michael and I felt, and we followed her across the camp. I felt cold pins and needles, and we rushed quickly into the campground where two of our friends were in the tent. And come to see what the yelling was about, Michael and I were trying to collect ourselves and starting to try to explain what we've seen. Something weird when Tim comes out of the tent. Now, the owners of the tent were equally shocked because they had just been in their empty tent, so they thought Tim was playing a prank on them. But Tim was sweaty and out of breath and said what a weird thing happened to him. He had somehow gotten lost coming back from the bathroom and felt like he walked forever. He did not know how he found the camp or gotten in the tent. He sits down and we start to talk at once. Our friends still think it's a prank and adrenaline, meaning we aren't making much sense when Tim vomits and complains of being cold. He's burning up to the touch and seems to just suddenly be extremely ill. Someone's taking him to the hospital where they find he has a ridiculously high fever and diagnosis the flu. So they hold him overnight. Michael and I investigate the walk up to the bathroom and find it takes all of 45 seconds to walk the path. There's no weird light play when you're watching someone come from the bathroom to the campsite. Nothing weird happened the rest of the trip. Now, the explanation for all of this is that a friend came up with was that Tim had a fever, went to the bathroom, got disoriented and lost. Somehow, while lost, he stands perfectly to create a weird shadow effect that lasts 5 minutes. And possibly Michael and I were unwell too, referring to my headache. Feverish and delirious, Tim bumbles into the campsite and through the flap of just vacated tent just in time for his magical appearance. Tim now says he remembers nothing of the trip from dinner time on, but blames this on the fever. Michael considers it an alien experience. Frankly, I don't know what happened, but what I don't think explains what I felt and saw. I've had a few weird experiences happen before that and since that, including one other instance of someone who seemed unstuck from the right time and place. I lived in a house in Yorktown, Virginia, right where the battlefields probably were. The house was creepy, the yard was creepy, and the woods behind the house were creepy. I used to sleep on my brother's bedroom floor and sometimes in my sister's bed because it was so creepy. I always felt some weird presence around me. I wouldn't say it was evil, but I couldn't tell if it was good either. Well, one night when I was 10 or 11, I was sleeping on my brother's floor and I woke up from a dream about a gas station. I remember feeling kind of weird. About 30 seconds to a minute after I woke up, I'm 99% sure I woke, I saw a man appear in the doorway. He stood there for what felt like an hour, just staring at me, dressed in an old-fashioned clothing and hat. He was completely white and gray and a bit translucent. He eventually turned around and walked out the doorway. I saw him disappear. I ran into my sister's room and woke her after seeing a picture of my grandfather. I never had the opportunity to meet. I think it might have been him. She did not believe me, but a few months later she did. I was at a friend's sleepover and she had a friend at our house. Her friend was awoken by a little boy who apparently looked like me. The boy apparently said he was scared, and my sister's friend told my sister the boy was bugging her. My sister looks over telling the boy to go back to my bed. It wasn't until the morning she discovered I wasn't there the night before. Okay, so, full disclosure, I've taken a good amount of LSD. But before you write it off as you trippy man, just hear me out. Obligatory mention that I'm no longer religious, don't genuinely believe in paranormal, and I could not make this up if I tried. A good friend of mine from WI that I met in boot camp for the Navy came out to school with me in California for a few years. We started experimenting with psychedelics while freshmen, older freshmen, but freshmen, were in the dorms and had a mutual paranormal experience. My old university is built from the skeleton of an old army base that was really big, base for artillery and such, and was shut down in the Clinton era. Everyone jokes the dorms were haunted because they were repurposed military barracks. We also had dilapidated, run-down old admin and hospital buildings around the campus that we intoxicated college students would explore as sort of right out of the passage. So one day we took a good amount of alcohol, I took 5 hits and he took 3 and had a grand time. As we were peeking, we decided to lock ourselves in our windowless bathroom and put in headphones and just trip and jam out to music. It was so dark that you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, let alone each other across the bathroom. All of a sudden, the room expands in size and it's like I'm in a large square room with benches on all sides. On these benches are shadowy people of various shapes, sizes, gender, age, etc. The problem is that they're all angry, sad, or hurting, and are just not pleased that I can see them. I got really uncomfortably really fast and almost had to leave. But dead ahead was one shadowy figure that didn't seem to mind my presence. He actually was very calming and soothing presence. Despite being made out to be blackness in a black lightless room, I could still make out the edges and some details of his silhouette. He was an average-sized man in a full-dressed uniform for the army. Even in pitch black, he looked snazzy. He did not speak to me per se, but he helped me understand the circumstances and resume my enjoyment of pretty intense and vivid trip. I decided not to mention it anymore as I figured it was the drugs doing their thing. The next morning, we met up with another friend of ours that was babysitting us to discuss the trip, and he commented that after we left the bathroom, we were pretty quiet the rest of the night and did not say much. Then we went to bed. My friend cautiously asked me if I felt weird that morning, or if I had initials stuck in my head. I asked him to clarify because when I woke up, I couldn't stop thinking of that boy's name, Roy J. Miller. He seemed startled and said that he had initials RJM stuck in his head all morning. We looked to our friend who said that neither of us had mentioned anything like that. A bit perplexed, we shared experiences. Apparently, we both experienced a version of the room expansion, the shadow people, and the sharp-dressed military man who soothed our frantic minds and emotional states. We looked it up, and in East Garrison of Fort Ord, the base our school was built on and my dorm building was repurposed East Garrison, there was a man stationed there named Roy James Miller, who went overseas to Vietnam in 1968 and died overseas while serving the army. I saw a picture and it looked about right from what we could remember. I couldn't believe it. I told this story a few times, still not entirely sure I believe it. But I can't deny that it happened, and neither can my friend. I have many, but one which stands out happened on the first Saturday in July 2008. Either the day before or after July 4th, I forget which. I've moved into the castle owned by a widowed old lady who was a friend of mine in order to help her run it. It was open to the public for tours and events. We had a tour where the chaperone of a group of students broke away from his group, wandering down one of the galleries. I caught up with him and asked him to return to his group. He stopped in front of the doors connecting the gallery to the ballroom and said, "Watch this." He waved an EMF detector in front of the doors and it went off like crazy. Finally, he joined his group. The tour ended and we started to close up the castle for the day. An hour or so later, it was just me and the owner. She was on the 3rd floor playing the pipe organ in a room with a balcony overlooking one end of the ballroom. Alongside one long end of the ballroom was a musician's gallery. I was walking along there, approaching the door at the end which led to my apartment, when I heard someone call my name from nearby. I turned and there was no one there. I went to the organ loft and asked the owner if she'd called me and she said no. But she heard something down in the ballroom. I went down to check and did not find a thing. Then I went to the doors connecting the gallery. When I opened them, there was a blast of hot, staticky air rushing in, even though we have closed the windows and doors. I called the owner down and she approached via the gallery, and her hair started to lift off her head. She said there was something here that ought to not be here. Entering the ballroom, she walked to the middle of the room, looked up at one of the large stained glass windows, closed her eyes and said, "Show me your face." She jumped back and said she had seen something sinister. She again closed her eyes, pushed her hands forward and said, "Get out of my house." Her hands strained against something I could not see, and as she pushed forward, she was leaning about 45 degrees on the tips of her toes. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from behind me and another stream of hot, staticky air. The owner fell forward onto the ground and got up and said, "It's gone." However, For the remainder of the evening, we heard laughing, whispering, knocking, tapping, footsteps, and echoes throughout the castle. I contemplated leaving that night, but remained for a couple of years. I had many other experiences at that castle, including getting locked in a room while home alone and having the doorknob come off, doors opening in my bedroom at 3 a.m., and the staircase shaking as an invisible force moved up or down it, etc., etc., etc. I got a job working abroad, and my company provided me with a simple apartment upon my arrival. I moved into the ground floor of an old and even moldy apartment. The apartment was a studio with just the basic necessities. A coworker of mine mentioned that there were some strange electronic issues another worker had described. Mainly, the TV would turn on and off on its own. I didn't think much of it, and I was simply focused on making a good impression at my new job as an ESL teacher. Sure enough, I started to recognize that the TV did seem to have a mind of its own. I don't watch TV, and I was busy trying to adjust to my new environment. Sometimes, I would go to work and then realized I left a textbook in my apartment. I would go back to pick it up. Upon re-entering the apartment, I would find the TV on a pretty high volume, and knowing full well I had not turned it on. No big deal, maybe I had turned it on by accident before I left for work. Another time, I came home for lunch to find the same thing, TV on, high volume. I was 100% certain I had not turned it on. Must be these electronic issues my coworker had mentioned. No big deal. Then, one night, I was fast asleep on my single bed when I was awoken by the blaring sounds on my TV that was positioned at the foot of my bed. I remember wondering how the hell had it turned on. Maybe accidentally with my foot, however unlikely. So I sat up and quickly turned it off, and several hours later, the TV woke me up again. This time loud white static woke me up with a startle, and flickering bright light filled my tired eyes. This time I was annoyed. I sat up and turned up the volume all the way down before turning it off again and crashing back down onto the bed. It happened a third time and the volume returned to a very high level. What the heck? I finally got up and unplugged the TV and cursed through my teeth until I fell back asleep. This became a semi-regular occurrence until I unplugged the TV permanently. On several occasions I had different kinds of experiences coming from my dark cave-like apartment, only this time it wasn't the TV that caught my attention. I distinctly remember opening my front door, and as soon as I entered the doorframe, I would feel like I was intruding into my own apartment. It's difficult to describe, but I would feel unwelcome, like I was walking into someone else's apartment. This went on for the first 2 to 3 months of living here. At the same time, I started to have nightmares that were reoccurring and vivid. I would dream that I was being dragged from my bed through the floor and dragged further and further underground through layers of soil, mud, and rock. The nightmares were dark, but what freaked me out the most is that they were violent, and I would be dragged down into an abyss with such speed and force I would wake up in a panic and sweat. One night, the nightmare was especially intense. This sounds unbelievable, but I remember laying on my bed and physically feeling a hand wrap around my ankle trying to yank me or pull me off the bed. I woke up suddenly and felt the presence of someone or something in the room with me. I quickly jumped to turn on the lights and thought of course there was nothing there to see. But I felt like I was not alone in that apartment. I thought I was being ridiculous. I would look in the mirror and talk to myself, telling myself that this is preposterous. Get a fucking grip. You're just stressed out about the new job, and you're anxious, and that's why you're having these nightmares. I am 6'3" and probably 220 freaking pounds. One night, I fell asleep facing the wall. I generally sleep on my side, and I remember being asleep, but during my sleep, I was slowly becoming aware of 2 things. First, I was walking inside my dream, and second, there was someone next to me inside my apartment while I slept. This feeling kept growing, and soon I was awake staring at the wall with my back to someone standing next to my bed. I was sure of it. Like the feeling you get when you know someone's staring at you in a crowd. I stayed staring at the wall in the darkness without moving, just breathing and listening. I tried to be rational. Maybe it was the girl I was seeing. Maybe she snuck in to surprise me with the late visit. But I knew that wasn't possible. She did not have a spare key. No one did. I could feel the cold air against my skin as I lay there, staring blankly at the wall. I could feel the hairs begin to stand up on my neck. Suddenly, I began to feel foolish. I started to laugh a little on the inside. Just turn around and you'll see that there isn't anyone or anything behind you. Don't be a sissy. Just turn around and... A rough, firm hand landed on my shoulder and pulled me. I swung around and saw her. Saw it. A pale old woman in a tattered gown seemed to be howling at me without a sound, reaching for my face with one hand and the other hand resting on my shoulder. I leaped onto the air and literally climbed the walls to get away from that demon. It had physically touched me, and I was not a dream because I had laid there for several minutes staring at that damn wall. I scrambled around the walls to the light switch on the far side of the room, and when I hit the light, she disappeared. I stood there for a few minutes. Then I turned on all the lights and turned the radio and the TV on just to provide the illusion of company or distraction. I don't know. I wanted to leave immediately, but I had nowhere to go. I had no real friends, and it was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. I kept the lights on and I opened my laptop. I sat at the edge of my bed and logged in online to see if I could find friends back home who were still awake. Anyone to talk to, really. I then realized there was a cold spot next to my bed, where I'd seen her. It was much colder than the rest of the room. I had no windows open and the AC was broken. I walked over to the thermostat and noted it was 26 degrees Celsius. The rest of my apartment was toasty warm, except for that area right next to my bed. I was spooked and did not sleep at all that night. I told a few coworkers about my experience and they all had a good laugh at my expense. I became the butt end of a lot of jokes, but it did not bother me. Some weeks later, when I was out with some coworkers for drinks, the subject of my ghosts came up, and one of the coworkers said that the previous tenant, a teacher who just left the country, had some weird things happen at that apartment, and that before him, an old lady had killed herself in my apartment only 6 months prior. I didn't have any more encounters with that old hag. I moved out of the apartment within a month or two of the incident. Okay guys, Midnight Monster here. That was 9 creepy paranormal stories that you just can't explain. If you enjoyed today's stories, make sure you subscribe to the channel and press the like button. Midnight Monster will be here for daily videos, so stick around if you dare.